Hello everybody and welcome to another winter watercolor tutorial. Today's painting is inspired by KaterinaKamova and I will link her in the description if you want to check out her work. But this tutorial was a lot of fun to paint and it's quite simple if you can just break it down into steps, which is exactly what I'm going to do for you. So after you've taped the borders of your piece of paper, so you could have nice clean and crisp ones when you're done, you want to take blue watercolor paint and just create a very rough line on the top third of your page. So you're going to be separating the top third from the bottom 2/3 with a rough jaggedy line. And you want to extend that paint all the way to the top of that entire third of the page. And by doing so, you're sort of creating the base for the wet on wet technique. And you want the top to be much lighter than the bottom portion of that third. So you want to keep adding darker and darker blues and even a little bit of black mixed in. Just on that bottom line, and then you can extend those colors upwards and sort of drag them out so that it creates sort of the illusion of mountains almost. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be. You know, it could be a forest, it could be mountains, but the point is that we want that horizon line of that top third to be very, very dark. So just keep adding those colors and the darker hues and the blacks until you're happy with the opacity of that third section. So the next step is we are going to be creating the background of our foreground here. You want to make sure that you paint in a wavy, a wavy river that extends from the top right corner, so just below that third basically, all the way to the bottom left corner. And once you've penciled that river in, you want to fill in everything else on that page except that river with water, because again we're going to be using the wet on wet technique, and you can just dab on some blue hues in random portions. You just want to basically separate the river from the rest of that background, or the foreground rather. The other thing I wanted to mention is to make sure to leave sort of a jaggedy looking white space between your top third and your foreground, because this is where we're going to be adding some little grassy, fieldy details, and it just adds another element to your painting. So once that foreground portion has dried and you're happy with your little blue accents, we're going to be painting in the river. This is my favorite part because it really kind of makes the painting come together. And when you're painting your river, you just want to make sure that the portion that is furthest away from the viewer is the thinnest and the darkest. So you want to paint in some very dark blue, even black hues in that top portion. And as you get closer and closer to the viewer, to the foreground, you want to make that river lighter and lighter and lighter until it's even lighter than the sky that you painted in that top third portion of your painting. This is because we're going to be reflecting some tree shadows onto the river and you want them to be visible, so just make it a little bit lighter. Also, the reason why the river portion that's closest to the viewer is lighter is because it's supposed to be reflecting the lighter portions of the sky. Once you're happy with your river and it's completely dry, you can go ahead and add a moon if you wish, or a sun, whatever you prefer. I just used white acrylic paint because my my top third was already so light in the top portion that if I used white watercolor paint, it would just look gray. So definitely consider using some white acrylic paint for your moon or your sun. Alright, so now we're going to be filling in that portion that we left white in between the foreground and the kind of background mountainous area. This is really easy. You're just going to take some very dark blue mixed with a little bit of black watercolor, and you're going to outline the bottom portion of that white space, making sure to add little bit of, I guess, blades of grass or something sticking out just to make it look like there's some grass or some fields there in the background. And you can also add a little shadow coming from that grassy area just to give it a little bit more, more of a realistic. Once you're happy with your little grassy details, we can start making the painting come together by adding all of our tree details. So you want to start your background trees from that grassy patch, extending past your mountainous area up into the sky. And the trees that are kind of in front of the moon, you want to make them a little bit lighter because the one I'm painting right now, I used black watercolor for that one, but then I used some watered down black for the ones that were sort of in the middle portion, or I wanted to make it look like they were reflecting the light from the moon, which is why I made them a little bit lighter. Once you're happy with all of your background trees, you can paint as little or as many as you'd like, but I just sort of roughly filled in the background there. You can start painting in some trees in the foreground. So naturally, because they're closer to the viewer, these trees are going to be darker in appearance and also larger. So you want to start them in that sort of white patch beside the river and extend them all the way to the top of the page as if they are going off of the page, that they're, growing. If you're thinking of this as like a photograph, then the photo didn't capture the entire length of the tree. Also, as always, I've included the links to all of the paintbrushes I use for my work if you're interested in acquiring some of these. And the ones that I use, I'm very, very happy with because they're excellent for detail work, especially the sort of detail work that is required in tree branches, because as we know, tree branches are very, very complex. So you can place your trees anywhere that you want in your painting. I included some coming up from the edge of the river as well, and then I'm going to paint one more in the sort of bottom right portion. I think the more trees that you paint in different locations, the more exciting your painting is going to end up looking, because it just adds a lot of different elements to your painting and a lot of different things for the viewer to look at, which makes, in general, the painting look a lot more complicated and a lot more pleasing to the viewer. Once your trees have completely dried, we are going to be adding some of the finishing touches that kind of complete the look of the painting. So we're going to first add the shadows of the trees, and because my moon or my sun, whatever you want to interpret that as, is sort of in the left portion of my painting, all of the trees that are on the left portion of the painting, the shadows are going to come down almost vertically, and then as you move your way right, the shadows are progressively going to become more and more angled towards the right. Towards the right. So just keep that in mind as you are painting your shadows. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when your shadows overlap the river, you want to paint the shadows darker on the river portion, because water reflects shapes much nicer than snow does. So on snow, it just looks like a shadow, but sometimes if the water is clear enough and still enough on water, if the water is clear enough and still enough, then the shadow or the reflection of very clear, and it almost looks exactly like the object itself. So that's why we want to make that reflection that overlaps the river darker. Don't forget to also draw in the reflection of the moon in the water, and you can also add some of those little grassy fieldy details that we painted on the horizon. That will just make your river look a little bit more realistic. You can also add a dark strip just on the inner edge of that top portion of the river. Again, it adds sort of a shadow element, and it makes it look that like the river is a little bit lower than the snow, which is in actuality how it really is in real life. The river or the water is typically a little bit lower than the surrounding ground cover area. Once you are completely happy with all of your details, you can go ahead and peel off the tape from your piece of paper. This will reveal beautiful, clean, and crisp borders, and we are all finished. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe, check out my previous uploads, and I will see you in next week's tutorial.